My best friend, the person I trusted most in the world, took my secrets and used them to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. She thought she'd won, that she had broken me down completely. But what she didn't realize was that I had something she could never take from me: the truth. And when I finally revealed it, she was the one left humiliated, in front of the very same people she once tried to turn against me. Before we dive into this story, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you never miss A Tale of Justice. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from today? Let me know in the comments. Okay, let's get into it. I never thought I'd say this, but the person who hurt me the most wasn't an enemy, a rival, or some stranger on the street. It was my best friend. The one I confided in, laughed with, and trusted with the deepest parts of myself. She knew things about me no one else did, things I only shared because I believed she was my safe place. But it turned out, I was simply handing her weapons she'd later use against me. It happened one evening during what was supposed to be a casual gathering among friends. There were maybe a dozen of us sitting in a cozy living room, drinks in hand, music low in the background. The atmosphere was warm and easy, the kind of night where you relax and let your guard down. I remember feeling grateful, even comfortable, until she opened her mouth. With a sweet smile plastered on her face, she leaned forward and began telling a story. Except, it wasn't just any story. It was my story. A private confession I had, shared with her weeks before, late one night when I was feeling vulnerable. She spoke about it as if it were a funny anecdote, something worth laughing over, and everyone in the room chuckled politely at first. But as she kept going, dragging out the details, I could feel my chest tightening. The laughter grew sharper, louder, and soon it wasn't just polite chuckles. It was actual amusement. They weren't laughing with me. They were laughing at me. I sat frozen, my glass clutched tightly in my hand, the condensation soaking my palm. My cheeks burned hot, but inside I felt ice cold. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She had taken something that once left me in tears and turned it into entertainment for others. My so-called best friend had just exposed one of my deepest secrets in front of everyone, and she did it with the kind of casual cruelty that made it seem like it was all just harmless fun. I forced myself to smile, to play along, but inside, something cracked. In that single moment, I knew our friendship had shifted forever. A line had been crossed, one I could never ignore. After that night, as I sat there pretending to laugh along, I couldn't help but replay everything about our friendship in my mind. How had I let it get to this point? To understand how deeply this betrayal cut, you need to know who we both were before it happened. I'll start with myself. I've always been the kind of woman who values loyalty above all else. I'm not flashy, not the loudest voice in the room, and certainly not someone who chases the spotlight. I tend to keep my circle small, because trust isn't something I hand out easily, but once I do, I give it fully. That's why, for years, I thought of her as the sister I never had. She was the person I leaned on during difficult times, the one I trusted with the things I would never dare put into words for anyone else. She, on the other hand, well, she had a very different personality. To most people, she was charming, magnetic even. She had a way of walking into a room and drawing attention without trying, or at least that's what she wanted everyone to believe. But if you looked a little closer, you'd notice the cracks. The way her compliments often had sharp edges, the way her laughter sometimes lingered a beat too long when the joke was at someone else's expense. The weeks following that night were like walking through a minefield. Every interaction with her became unpredictable, and every gathering felt like a test of endurance. At first, I hoped she would realize she had gone too far. I hoped she'd apologize quietly at least, and try to make amends. But instead, she doubled down, deliberately, cruelly. It started subtly. She would bring up little details of my personal life during casual conversations. The kind of things that seemed insignificant on the surface, but were carefully chosen to embarrass me. At first, I tried to laugh along, to shrug it off, to avoid giving her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. But the laughter was brittle, forced, and I could feel everyone around me starting to sense the tension. Then it escalated. During another gathering with mutual friends, she began twisting my words, taking snippets of things I'd confided in her and framing them as ridiculous, embarrassing stories. She didn't just repeat them, she embellished them. She painted me as foolish, naive, and emotionally unstable, and the group ate it up. The casual acquaintances laughed. The close friends nodded knowingly, some with pity, others unsure what to believe. Each time I felt a cold, heavy weight in my chest. My trust had been shattered, and my confidence was eroding. I had spent years believing she had my back, and yet here she was, methodically dismantling my reputation with a smile on her face. I realized she didn't even need to raise her voice. Her charm did all the damage. People listened, laughed, and gossiped because she made it entertaining. I confronted her once quietly, hoping a private conversation could at least slow the damage. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She tilted her head, that same saccharine smile on her face. "I'm just joking," she said, as if the room, the embarrassment, and my humiliation were nothing more than harmless fun. "You're so sensitive." It was infuriating. Her words were designed to diminish my feelings, to make me doubt my own reactions. And worse, they worked. For a moment, I questioned whether I was overreacting. But then I remembered the nights I confided in her, the things I had trusted her to keep safe. This wasn't joking. It was intentional, and I wasn't going to allow it to continue. The tension built every day. At work, in social settings, even among mutual friends, she continued to exploit the trust I had given her. Each little act of cruelty chipped away at my patience. But something else was growing inside me, a quiet, simmering determination. I refused to be a passive victim. I refused to allow her to define my reputation or control the narrative of my life. And then it happened. The incident that made my decision absolute. During a gathering in a friend's backyard, she did something I could not ignore. She began publicly mocking an embarrassing story from my past, a story I had trusted her with under the guise of friendship, and did so with such relish that the crowd laughed harder than ever. I watched as my face flushed red, my chest tightened, and my voice caught in my throat. That was the breaking point. She had gone too far, and it was no longer about pride or hurt feelings. This was about justice. She had revealed who she really was to everyone but me, and I realized it was time to level the playing field. I needed a plan, something clever and undeniable, that would show everyone, especially her, that the truth could not be twisted forever. I spent that night thinking. I replayed every conversation, every betrayal, every laugh at my expense. And then it hit me. She had been careless in one crucial area. There was evidence of her own cruelty, recordings, little voice notes, and moments she had admitted her jealousy and manipulation aloud, assuming no one would ever hear them. That was my weapon. That was how I could turn the tables. The realization gave me a sense of calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Finally, I had leverage. And I knew in that moment that when the time came, the person laughing at me would be the one left speechless. After that backyard gathering, I couldn't shake the humiliation. Every detail of her betrayal replayed in my mind like a loop I couldn't escape. The laughter, the smirks, the way she leaned in as if savoring each word she spoke. It haunted me. I tried to push it aside, to focus on work and my own life. But each encounter with her reminded me that the threat hadn't passed. Then came the moment that solidified everything. It was another casual meetup, this time a small dinner at a friend's apartment. I thought I could handle it. I told myself I was prepared. But the moment she walked in, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She looked radiant, charming. Exactly as she always did, completely unaware that I had already started to see through her carefully constructed facade. Midway through the evening, she began again. This time, it wasn't just playful teasing. She pulled a story from months ago, a deeply personal detail I had shared in confidence. She laughed as she told it, emphasizing every embarrassing part, adding small embellishments to make me appear foolish and naive. The room erupted in laughter. Some friends smiled awkwardly, unsure how to react, but others joined in fully, eyes sparkling with amusement. I froze, my chest tightening, my hands gripping the edge of the table. My stomach churned, a mix of shame, anger, and disbelief. I tried to intervene to stop her, but the words caught in my throat. Every instinct told me to remain calm, to not give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose composure. But inside, something shifted. In that moment, I realized I wasn't just embarrassed anymore. I wasn't just hurt. I was done being her victim. That cold, hard knot in my stomach transformed into something stronger. A quiet resolve. I wouldn't sit idly by while she continued to manipulate, to mock, to humiliate me. I left that dinner with one thought repeating in my mind. This has to stop, and it will stop on my terms. Over the next few days, I replayed everything I knew about her. I remembered the small, seemingly insignificant moments, the voice memos she recorded, the times she had laughed at other people's expense and admitted it openly, the private conversations where she confessed her envy and desire to keep people in line. These weren't just casual glimpses into her character. They were evidence. Solid, undeniable evidence that she was exactly as cruel as she appeared. That's when the plan crystallized. I would no longer be at her mercy. I had the means to expose her, and I would do it with precision, ensuring that the humiliation she had inflicted on me would finally be reflected back onto her, amplified, undeniable, and completely deserved. This breaking point wasn't just about her actions at that dinner. It was the accumulation of weeks, months, even years of subtle betrayals, manipulations, and carefully hidden cruelty. That night, I promised myself I would take control of the story, and when the moment was right, the world would finally see her for who she truly was. After weeks of replaying the moments she had humiliated me, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. Revenge, I realized, had to be precise. Clever, deliberate, and utterly undeniable. I needed a plan that wasn't just emotional but strategic. I needed something that would not only protect my dignity but also ensure she faced the consequences of her actions. And then it hit me. The recordings. I had kept voice memos over time, innocuous at the moment but incredibly revealing in hindsight. Some were casual messages she had sent me, laughing about other friends behind their backs. Others were snippets of conversations where she admitted envy, manipulation, and her delight in making others feel small. At the time, I had saved them, without thinking, merely for personal reflection, a way to process her words. Now, they became my weapon. The brilliance of this was in their authenticity. These weren't staged accusations or hearsay. They were her own words, spoken freely, recorded without the expectation that they would ever see the light of day. They were proof, undeniable and damning, of her character. And most importantly, they would leave no room for denial. I spent the next several days carefully reviewing every recording. I marked the moments that best illustrated her cruelty, the laughter as she twisted truths, the casual mockery of people she claimed to care about, the pride in her manipulations. I compiled them into a single sequence, a damning montage that would leave no doubt in anyone's mind about who she really was. But I didn't stop there. I thought about the timing and setting. It had to be public enough to ensure the social impact, but controlled enough that I wouldn't risk losing my composure. I wanted the moment to be undeniable, the impact immediate, and the humiliation exact. I rehearsed the logistics in my mind. How I would set up the playback, how I would introduce it subtly so no one would suspect until the moment it mattered most. I imagined her face as the first notes played, confusion, disbelief, and finally, the dawning realization that the power she had wielded so easily over me was about to collapse entirely on her. The satisfaction of knowing I had something concrete, a clever, undeniable weapon, shifted my anxiety into calm determination. For the first time in weeks, I felt in control. She had assumed the upper hand, that she could manipulate and humiliate me at will. But now I held the leverage, and so the plan was born. I would wait for the perfect moment, the perfect gathering, and then reveal everything. Her own words, her own admissions, her own manipulations would become the instrument of her downfall. It wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake. It wasn't about anger or spite. It was about justice. She had crossed a line, and I had the means to show the world, and her, exactly who she really was. The night had finally come. I had waited patiently for the right moment, a gathering where all the usual players would be present, friends and acquaintances alike, the perfect audience to witness the truth. I arrived early, as casually as possible, making small talk, observing the room, and ensuring the setup was seamless. I had the recordings ready on my phone, connected discreetly to the living room speakers. Everything was silent, calm, and unsuspecting. The atmosphere was light, laughter spilling from corners of the room, drinks in hand, snacks scattered on the table. And there she was, my former best friend, radiant, confident, and completely unaware that the tide was about to turn. She began her usual routine, leaning into the group with that saccharine smile, making jokes at my expense. The same ones she had delivered countless times before, carefully disguised as harmless teasing. For a moment I allowed her to speak, letting her arrogance take the spotlight. I wanted her fully invested, fully comfortable, before the revelation. Then, when her words reached the peak of mockery, I calmly interrupted. I smiled gently and said, "Actually, there's something you all should hear." The room fell silent, curious glances turning toward me. I pressed play. Her own voice echoed through the speakers, laughter and admissions spilling out in perfect clarity. Snippets of messages and conversations where she had admitted to jealousy, manipulation, and delight in humiliating others played one after another. Every laugh, every boast, every casual cruelty she had ever expressed toward me was now laid bare for everyone to hear. The silence that followed was immediate and deafening. Faces that had laughed at my expense now registered shock, disbelief, and slowly dawning comprehension. The social balance she had so carefully maintained crumbled before her eyes. I watched her reaction with a calm, steady heart. Confusion first, as she realized what was happening. Then denial, her lips moving as if she could argue away the undeniable. And finally, the slow, sharp burn of realization, the exact emotion she had once inflicted on me. She was powerless. Her usual charm, the smiles, the laughter, all vanished in that moment. She was left exposed, cornered by her own words, facing the consequences she had meticulously avoided for so long. It was perfect justice. The audience, my friends, my peers, they had witnessed the truth unfold. And as the final snippet of her admissions played, I felt a wave of relief and vindication wash over me. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't lashed out. I had simply let the truth speak for itself, and the impact was absolute. As the last of the recordings played, I watched her face change in real time. At first, confusion flickered across her features, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a hesitant tilt of the head. Then came the rapid succession of emotions I had imagined for weeks: shock, disbelief, panic. She opened her mouth, attempting to speak, to deny what everyone had just heard, but no words could form. Her usual charm, the effortless smile she wore, to mask her cruelty, faltered completely. It was gone, stripped away by her own admissions. The room that had once been hers to manipulate now seemed to press in around her, eyes fixed on the truth she could no longer escape. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands as she stepped back, looking around desperately for some ally, some friend to vouch for her. But there was none. Everyone had seen it: her manipulations, her laughter at others' pain, her delight in control. And there was nowhere left for her to hide. She tried to laugh nervously, a feeble attempt to salvage the situation. "It's not what it sounds like," she said, voice wavering. I was joking. I didn't mean—" But it was too late. The room held only silence, punctuated by the faint echo of her own words still playing from the speakers. The social power she had wielded so easily for months was gone. The friends who had once laughed at me now looked at her with a mixture of astonishment, disappointment, and, in some cases, subtle vindication for what they had witnessed. I stayed, calm, composed, letting the moment linger just long enough for her to understand that she had lost control completely. She was the one who had humiliated, manipulated, and lied, and now she was the one exposed, powerless in the face of her own actions. Every attempt she made to regain footing, the weak excuses, the forced laughter, the defensive gestures, only emphasized her vulnerability. I realized then that the humiliation she had inflicted on me had returned in full measure, mirrored back with precision and inevitability. The confrontation wasn't dramatic in the sense of yelling or chaos. It was a slow, undeniable revelation. And that's what made it devastating. She couldn't argue with her own words, couldn't charm her way out of the evidence, couldn't manipulate anyone into believing her false narrative. For the first time, she was silent, truly powerless, and entirely visible for who she really was. The moment that followed was quiet, almost surreal. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, now held only a thick, expectant silence. Every eye was on her, and I could feel the tension settle like a weight in the air. This was the culmination of weeks of careful planning, patience, and determination, the moment where the injustice I had endured was finally reversed. She tried to speak, fumbling over her words, attempting to explain herself, but it was hopeless. Each excuse, each defensive remark, only highlighted the truth she could no longer hide. I watched as the reality sank in for everyone present, that the charming, witty, loyal friend they had all admired was, in fact, manipulative and cruel. Then I took a deep breath, steady and deliberate, and addressed the room. "I think you've all heard enough," I said, my voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "This is the real story, not the one she wanted you to believe." I didn't need to elaborate. The recordings had done all the work. Her laughter, her admissions, her own words, everything she had hidden behind smiles and jokes, now stood as undeniable evidence. And the effect was immediate. Friends shifted in their seats, some exchanging knowing glances, others simply absorbing the weight of the truth. Her expression transformed from panic to despair as she realized the full scope of her exposure. No charm, no excuses, no manipulative spin could undo the impact. She was utterly humiliated, publicly, unavoidably, and deservedly. I saw her shoulders slump, the confident mask she wore for months crumbling entirely. It was poetic in a way that felt almost cinematic. The very cruelty she had used to wound me now reflected back, magnified in front of the audience she had once controlled. I stayed composed, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the lesson to land. The social dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the center of attention, no longer in control. For the first time, the room saw her for exactly who she was, and I could finally allow myself to exhale, a mixture of relief, satisfaction, and quiet vindication settling over me. It was more than just revenge. It was justice. She had spent months trying to humiliate me, and now the scales had finally balanced. And I realized, in that exact moment, that I didn't need anger to fuel this victory. I only needed patience, strategy, and the courage to let the truth speak for itself.